Kick off. I think first and foremost, thank you all so much for joining us on our monthly webinar series. We're spending our second month on culture, which is what this presentation is about. So how to interview and evaluate for culture fit as part of your interview. It's a follow-up companion to our previous webinar last month, which was how to define and kind of classify your culture. So this builds on that one, although it is unique. It is not a sequel. You do not need to have seen the first one to hopefully find value in this one. So kind of roadmap for today is, Sarah's going to get us started talking through what we hear with regards to culture and what we've seen in terms of some of the metrics experienced by organizations that prioritize cultural fit as part of their hiring and talent management practices. And then I'll dive into some specific strategies and a framework for building out a really sound, scientifically solid cultural interview. And then as we wrap up, there will be an opportunity for you at the end to schedule some time to talk with myself or one of our I-O psychologists in kind of a sales-free setting about the plight that you're on with interviewing and using culture as part of your hiring process. So again, thank you so much for attending. I'm going to pass it to Sarah as we move into the presentation. Throughout, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you prefer to save them for the end, we can certainly chat through them. But really excited to have you all. Thanks again for attending, and we will dive in.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you, Craig. I just want to reiterate that we appreciate you guys joining. For those of you that did attend our last webinar on culture, some of this might look familiar. I promise it's just a slide or two, and then we're going to dive into the interview portion of it. But for those of you that didn't, right, when we think about culture and how that is a piece of our hiring process, certainly a piece of maintaining employees, we're hearing from a lot of our clients that they've been tasked to go find individuals or candidates that are going to be a great culture fit, right? It's essential. It is critical. It sits at the center of everything we do. So get out there and find them. We love the term go-getters. It's a great example of what some companies might have as a piece of their culture, but is inherently not very specific, right? And it's not very well defined as is with just that word. So we know that it can be a struggle to really hire effectively for culture. So what we want to talk about today is once you've gone through the very key steps at the beginning of defining what exactly your organization's culture is, it's like, what does it mean to be a go-getter at your organization? We want to talk about the next step that follows that. And that's going to be, now that you've got those good competencies or those good culture metrics outlined, how do we effectively interview for those? So we know that it is, when we're tasked with this project, because it's critical or it's high priority, it truly is. There's a ton of reward, and it's why we're spending a second month talking about this topic. One that I love to point out is that 17% increase in performance. When you've got individuals that align with your culture, right? And when you've done a really great job defining it. So one of the examples we like to use is think about those individuals in retail. You've got a Publix that exists out there, and then you've got a Walmart. They're both extremely large, very successful in their own right organizations. And they might both say that they have a customer-centric culture, but how that customer-centric culture plays out can be very different. When you've got someone at Publix, or I should say a customer at Publix that asks a question, you want someone that is going to align with customer-centric in the way that they stop what they're doing, walk that customer over to the shelf, maybe make a recommendation about another great option that goes with it, and then goes back, to making sure that customer is good before they continue stocking the shelf. So they're going to align, right? They're going to perform better if they align with that. Whereas your Walmart customer-centric employee may be someone that knows that a shopper at Walmart is looking to get in and get out and be very efficient. So they're going to very quickly point you in the right direction, tell you what aisle it's on and maybe what side, and then go back to what they were doing. So two very different experiences, two very different ways that plays out, but really defining your culture and finding the individuals that align with it can certainly help to have them be more productive. So we know it's imperative, and we want to help you do a better job of hiring for it. So we talked about the kind of the top step, right? That there's the key of defining exactly what your company culture is and what those competencies can be defined as. And we know that that is something that kind of takes some self-reflection, right? So we always ask here, when you think about your company culture, not just the individual words that you're using, but what really comes to mind. And then that's kind of a first step to thinking through the definitions of those and how we go about hiring for them. But I do want to call out that that is an entire process, one that you definitely want to think very, very long and hard about, and make sure that you've got the right partner to go through that process with you. So if you're interested, we did do a webinar where we dove into that first step, and we've got a link here. We'll also send out this presentation afterwards so that you can listen to that if you're interested. But for the purpose of today, we want to assume that you've got a really great list of your culture. They're defined really well. And now it's time to jump in and actually have some really effective conversations with candidates during the interview process to see if they actually align with what you've identified. So I will sit back and let Craig take it from here in terms of that interview process.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, really excited to talk about interviewing. And I think that, the reality is that interviewing is hard. Like, it doesn't come naturally to really anybody, or certainly not most people. I mean, let's think about what an interview is. You're having a conversation with a candidate who is motivated to present themselves in the most desirable fashion possible. Not that they're trying to fool you, but they are trying to get a job. And so you need to get real information out of this candidate about their qualifications for the job and their technical expertise and their cultural fit. So that's hard. And then on top of that, we're taking a concept in and of itself like culture that is somewhat conceptual and maybe nebulous and hard to define. And we're layering that on top of this interview, which is already naturally difficult and sometimes challenging to get good information out of. Right. And so we know that the way that interviews tend to be approached has the potential to be somewhat inconsistent and subjective. And right along with that subjectivity, difficult to score, right? So oftentimes managers or interviewers are walking into the interview, viewing it as a conversation, coming out of the interview, trying to make some judgment about the quality of a candidate's fit based on that conversation. And as an example, you've probably heard this, most times if you ask someone who has conducted an interview, hey, how was that candidate? You hear things like, well, I think they were great. I think they'd be a good fit. I really had a connection with them, or they have that it factor. And then if you follow that up with, well, why do you think they would be great? Why do you think they'd be successful here? What was it about them that made you feel confident? They have a really hard time articulating why they feel that way. And that's really good evidence that there's a lack of objective data that's coming out of an interview to qualify which candidates are likely to be successful and which candidates are likely to struggle. And so as a way to deal with some of that inconsistency and subjectivity and uncertainty around cultural interviews or interviews in general, we want to present kind of a framework for how you can use your culture and the competencies that you've defined to evaluate candidates in the context of an interview. So 3 big steps. We've tried to kind of break these down into bite-sized nuggets. But certainly an interview starts with good questions. So how do we decide and determine what we're going to ask of candidates in an interview? 2, once we've got good questions, how do we know what a good answer to that question sounds like? How do we use candidates' responses to those questions to make a prediction about which candidates are likely to be successful and which candidates are likely to struggle? And then finally, once we've built out the questions and we have an idea about what we're looking for, listening for in the context of that interview, how do we then equip and dispatch the managers to go and conduct those interviews and to be successful and consistent and objective and all of those good things that we want a really effective cultural interview to be? So we're going to step through these in order. We're going to start with the questions. We're going to follow with the scoring, and then we're going to wrap up with the training. So all of this hinges upon, really starts with you having done, your organization having done a good job of defining what your culture is. And like Sarah referenced, we have a webinar dedicated exclusively to that. And so, we're going to build on that through this presentation. But it all starts with having a clear understanding and definition of what you're looking for whenever you say cultural fit. In this case, we're going to use some examples from organizations that we've worked with and cultural frameworks that we've seen in the past. And we're going to hit on collaboration, resilience, and innovation. Right. And so once we've done the work of defining what our cultural competencies consist of in terms of the behaviors and the attributes and styles that we're looking for, then we want to go straight into building questions that are attached to those cultural competencies. And I know the marketing team's going to get mad. I'm going to click back and forth between the next 3 slides. They did a great job putting together a great presentation. I tend to be a bit scattered in delivery, and so I'll ask for forgiveness instead of permission in this case. So generally speaking, when we're asking questions, we like those questions to be historical or retrospective, meaning that if we can get candidates recalling experiences or situations that they've encountered in the past, we get out of craft a response mode that candidates are often in, right? They want to craft a response to your question. And instead we get them into recall and experience mode. And once we get them into that mode, we can collect details and key players that they were involved with and outcomes. And so whenever we're building questions, we want to prioritize historical questions. Tell me about a time when, how have you handled situations like this in the past? Those styles of questions. Now, in some cases, those questions don't work. Let's imagine you're hiring a management trainee and they don't have professional management or leadership experience in the past, but leadership attributes are a critical competency as part of your cultural framework that you want to assess, right? You want to know if they're comfortable in conflict. Are they willing to persuade? Are they able to inspire and compel people? Right? These are critical competencies that your candidates might not have direct experience to pull from. And so in some cases, it can be very useful to ask a hypothetical question. How would you handle a situation like this? Or what would you do if presented with this challenge on the job? Now, they need to be thoughtfully built, right? They need to be rooted in something that candidate is likely to experience when they get on the job. But ultimately, hypothetical questions are okay. As long as they're, again, tied back to that cultural competency. What we want to avoid are questions that give rise to subjectivity. And I'll give an example here. And I won't say that I've done this in the past. In my younger years, I've done this. This is a personal example. This isn't like my friend did. I did this. Right. And so sometimes in the context of a conversation, maybe you're talking with someone and they mention that they enjoy golf or they played golf in college and that was part of what they were consumed with. And you being an interviewer and also a golfer, ask them what kind of equipment they played. And if they played good equipment, then they care about quality. And if they played bad equipment, they don't care about quality. Right. And so there are tendencies to make judgments about people using data points that are not objective. And sometimes those data points can give off an air of objectivity, even though they weren't built with job relevant characteristics in mind or qualifications or cultural fit. And so the key piece is that whenever we're building these questions, we want them to be rooted in our cultural competencies and characteristics and built to elicit information about whether someone's likely to be successful. And so, for example, if we take our cultural characteristics of collaboration and resilience and innovation, and we've done a good job of defining them. There's my click back. I'm sorry. I'm going to do it again probably. All we have to do is repurpose our definition. This is what we mean when we say collaboration. Repurpose it in the form of a question. So people who collaborate well at our organization, they work well with others towards shared goals. They communicate clearly and effectively, and they listen to other people's ideas. So we want to ask an interview question about that. How do we do that? In the past, how have you ensured that everyone on a team is heard, listening to others, and valued when working towards a shared objective? And so once we do the work of defining and calibrating our cultural framework, it becomes really easy to develop questions around that framework. We just repurpose the definition as a question. and a lot of the work is done for you. We'll do one more example really quickly. Take our question on resilience. Tell me about a time when, again, historical, looking back in the past, asking them to recall an experience so we can ask about details and specifics and outcomes. Tell me about a time when you received harsh criticism at work. How did you respond? What were your next steps? If we go back to our definition for resilience, bounces back from mistakes, learns from feedback, criticism, confident, enjoys a challenge in terms of self-improvement, right? And so once you've taken the steps to develop this solid cultural framework, the questions almost write themselves. And that's not like the I-O Psychologist who's done this dozens of times saying that. They really almost write themselves. Like if you have your cultural framework and you can pull it up on your other monitor, don't shut the presentation. Pull it up on your other monitor and look at it. I guarantee you there are questions embedded in there that you haven't thought through. So once you've taken the time to develop historical or hypothetical questions around your cultural competencies, using those definitions and behaviors embedded within those competencies, now the next question becomes, okay, I've got the question. I ask the question, how do I know if it's a good response? Like, how do I know if what the candidate said suggests they'll be successful or not in the context of this interview? And so one useful framework for kind of deciding what a good response sounds like is, what would your superstars say if you asked them that question? How would they respond? One of the exercises we've seen helpful to answer this question so that you're not, kind of in an echo chamber of your own thoughts and opinions is pull together a focus group, right? Grab some hiring managers or some people who have a good pulse of your organization's culture. Bring them around the table or the digital table if you're a Zoom organization like us, and ask this question, right? We've got our cultural framework. We know collaboration is important. We know resilience is important. What does it look like whenever people on your team are resilient and effective? What does it look like when people on your team are not as resilient or are struggling to be effective? I've got to plug my computer in so it doesn't shut off. Forgive me. I told you not to close the presentation, and I'm about to shut it down for all of us. Okay, here we go. I apologize. So the idea is that if resilience is important to your organization and the degree to which someone is resilient can make them a good fit or a bad fit, then let's articulate what good resilience looks like. Let's articulate what poor resilience looks like. And then in the candidates' responses, we're listening for those things, right? So good resilience at this hypothetical organization means they respond positively and proactively to criticism. They take time to self-reflect, and they consider how can they change their approach to be more effective in the future, right? That's what our high performers, that's what our resilient superstars do. So whenever I ask this question of a candidate, that's what I'm listening for. If I hear them say, well, that particular situation, I received criticism, but it wasn't really my fault. Or I knew that it was just a function of me not executing properly. There wasn't anything that I needed to change in my approach. I just needed to be more focused the next time around, right? Those are things that give us evidence that this candidate doesn't demonstrate resilience in the way that high performers at our organization demonstrate resilience. One more comment here. There is a profession, I-O Psychologists. This is what we do. I know this can feel heavy and it can feel like a steep hill to climb. If you're looking for support, reach out to an I-O Psychologist. We get nerdy about behaviorally anchored rating scales and building out these, response grading rubrics and all that fun stuff. There are people out there who are trained to support you through this effort, who would love to help. I know this can feel like, again, a steep hill to climb, but just know that there is a scientific framework for how we evaluate the quality of interview responses. It doesn't have to be subjective. There's a way to make it objective. Okay, so we've got our questions. We've got what we're listening for. How do we go about ensuring that the interview is effective and that our interviewers are trained well and equipped to be successful? When I look at this slide, I see guitar picks. In our preparation, some people see like the old highlighters that are triangular with the caps on them. I love this slide. The alliteration wasn't purposeful on this. So whenever you want to train your team, there are three things you want that training to really stress on: consistency, comfortability, or confidence. Those are both C's. That was an accident. And then lastly, compliance, right? So consistency in the sense that a critical aspect of an effective interview is that the hiring managers are consistent between one another. Meaning if Sarah and I are hiring for a position and I'm interviewing some candidates and Sarah's interviewing other candidates, we want those interviews to be consistent. That's fair to candidates. It's good for objectivity. And so that consistency comes from structure. Us taking time to dial in the questions, dial in what we're listening for, and then presenting those as semi-structured, scripted questions that we're going to ask candidates and that we're going to listen for in responses. If you've ever done this before, one of the sources of pushback that we occasionally get is, well, that takes my personality out of the interview, right? That just makes me a robot. I'm just reading from a sheet of paper, right? Valid concern. And so you want to stress, like, what we're looking for is consistency in the lines of questioning and consistency in how we're scoring the responses. We're not trying to make you a robot. You can still insert your personality. You can still be conversational. We want them to be comfortable. That's really the purpose of the training. Introduce the concept, give them confidence, let them practice and role play potentially. But we want to provide them with tools that make the interview easier and less daunting. And then finally, we want to use that training time to talk through compliance. What are the questions that we shouldn't ask? And there are some. I know if we've got some HR folks on the call, they could detail those for us. And so last piece about interviewing, and then I'll pass it over to Sarah to help move us towards conclusion and resolution here. If you've been conducting interviews for a while, or you've worked with an organization who really values effective interviewing, you've probably seen interview guides, right? The paper ones where it's a question per page and you're supposed to flip and take notes and circle scores. All done with the best of intentions, building out those paper interview guides. What we know is that paper is a barrier to them being adopted and used effectively. The paper ends up in a file cabinet. If it's in their inbox, they have to print it out before the interview. That's cumbersome. Most managers aren't preparing before an interview anyway, so giving them a step to do only makes it less likely that it's going to be a good interview. Highly recommend looking at platforms that can digitize this for you, that can warehouse your data. That makes it much easier to evaluate the quality of the interview and whether the interview is predictive of success, right? And so to the degree that you can, making your interview a digital guide as opposed to a paper guide reduces that barrier to effective interviewing, and it ensures that your interviewers are more likely to actually stick to the program, so to speak, because you're making it easy on them. And so again, highly recommend considering sources that allow you to digitize your interview. And then that allows you to evaluate the efficacy of the program. It allows you to evaluate whether specific questions are performing well or performing poorly. All of those fun things that data nerds like me like to consider when we're evaluating the quality of a pre-hiring assessment or interview. If you can digitize it, it's easier to deal with it. And so I know that Sarah has a few things that she wants to touch on with regards to how we've helped support clients through this endeavor in the past. Again, stick around. At the very end, we're going to share an opportunity to meet with someone on our I-O team to talk through your challenges and experiences and pursuits in interviewing. So I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Craig. Perfect segue. If you check the chat, because maybe you do have to leave a couple of minutes early, we hope not. There is a link that our MC is heading in. That link is how you can book some time with Craig direct. I do want to reiterate very quickly that it is not a sales meeting. Craig actually leads our I-O team that he mentioned earlier. And so they're very involved in the data analysis, right? And the conversations around supporting you through this journey. Not looking to sell you anything. But I do want to call out quickly because I know this kind of plays right off the back of what Craig was talking about. This is definitely a shameless plug, but in terms of really defining those questions that you want to include in the interview, very importantly, identifying what a good versus a acceptable versus a not great response looks like, and then digitizing that entire process and the capture of that information. This just gives you a look into what that might look like. So calling your attention to the left screenshot, that's an example of where via maybe your cell phone, your laptop, if you've got it sitting next to you, our system would generate a question. Hey, so go ahead and ask them this question. And then while they're either answering it live, if you're comfortable, or kind of right after as you're debriefing, you have the ability to say, Craig, that I was interviewing, answered that question really effectively. This one, not so much. These three effectively, and so on and so forth. And so you're able to really capture not only their responses, right, but definitely how you're rating them live and digitally. And then what that does is generate the report that you're looking at on the right. And so now when we've got maybe 10 or 15 candidates, or maybe this is more of a final and you're looking at the top 3 or 4, you're able to pull up these result sets that start to highlight for each of the culture competencies that we identified, where are each of these individuals aligned, and where did they miss the mark a little bit? And so this is taking their responses, right, and what you said in terms of great, good, not so great, and then giving you an easy to read and really easy to compare way of looking at each of those finalists and making some more informed hiring decisions. So that is one piece of it. I do want to say that, kind of us as a whole, everything that Craig has talked about is a very personalized way of going through your interview process, right? You could certainly Google best interview questions and it would come up with some top ones. But our approach is to say that your organization is very unique and is very different, especially in terms of its culture. And so our approach matches that. And what we're really looking to do is partner with our clients to understand, how do we give you the best insights on these candidates throughout the entire hiring process? So whether that is helping you to identify the individual culture competencies that exist within your organization and really define what those mean and come up with culture questions. Or if it's really looking at the kind of the middle of the process where you need some insights maybe to behavioral traits. Maybe you need some insights into the top of the funnel screening, right? We've got a way to really learn your organization, kind of take a deep dive into what makes you different and what you need out of candidates, and then kind of place them within your hiring process today. Right. So I kind of mentioned the different options we have here. We've helped clients to screen at the top of the funnel, certainly to assess their behavioral tendencies or even some skills. And then, of course, what we talked about today, right? How do you interview better, more thoroughly for culture or for any of the other insights that you're gathering throughout the process or through an assessment? So we'd be happy to help. I do want to circle back. I know that we dropped the link in the chat, but we'll call out some QR codes here. I will let Craig share what a phone call with him might look like.
Yeah, so would love to just chat with you and hear where you're at in your journey, whether it's around interviewing or building out a cultural framework, or where do we start, or how do we introduce this to leadership or stakeholders or get their buy-in and all that fun stuff and all of those challenges that you may be experiencing if you're embarking on a cultural journey with your talent management practices. So again, you can use this QR code, like Sarah mentioned earlier. If you don't have your phone handy, there's a link in the chat. We'll also include it in the follow-up from this meeting, but you can snap a photo of that QR code there, and it'll take you directly to the calendar of our I-O team. If you are really far along in your process and you want to talk through maybe specific solutions or how we could partner with you to build out a cultural interview or assessment, you do have access to the sales team down at the bottom. Notice the I-O team QR code's bigger. This is the one time that we get to champion the science over the sales, but would love to chat with you if you're interested. So again, thank you so much for sticking around and listening to what we had to say today. We very much value your time and participation, and certainly here to answer any questions or talk further offline.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks, Craig. Friendly reminder, there is a Q&A section at the bottom. We'd be happy to take questions. Normally a few of those will populate. So while we wait for those, I do want to take a second to brag on Craig and his team in terms of this meeting. We've had individuals join off the back of these that are just looking for some top level insights, others that are kind of in the middle of their journey and looking for some direction. I promise that you've got a handful of individuals that are, to Craig's word, not mine, they get very nerdy about the I-O side of things. It's almost always a really incredible conversation, definitely productive, and certainly not salesy. But often even if they never connect with us again, these individuals will walk away with some really great insights on how to take the next step in their project, maybe how to get the project started. So I can't stress enough that it's a really great meeting. It's a really great 30 minutes use of your time. I'm gonna jump into questions. So we have one at the top. I want to confirm. So you all said you'd email the presentation to us. You want to share with your team. Absolutely. That will be coming from our team. So look for that in your email this afternoon or tomorrow so that you have access to that. Someone also asked about sharing the recording because they had to step out. Yes, I believe the recording goes out as well. If not, I know it takes a little bit of marketing magic to get the editing down, but I know that they make them available. So we'll definitely give you the recording as well. Jumping into another question. Oh, the recording and the deck will go out tomorrow. Thank you, MC. So you'll see that in your inbox tomorrow. Craig, so we got a question. Do you work with schools to develop interview questions?
Yeah, absolutely. We've partnered with public institutions as well as schools that are serving kind of underserved populations and have very kind of core cultural competencies that might make them unique from maybe a typical school environment. So yes, we absolutely do certainly understand some of the challenges with interviewing in the school environment. And so I think the short answer to that is yes, it's always a fun experience for our I-O team to get to know the specific culture and expectations of those different school partners. But certainly it is something that we have worked on in the past, and we're actually currently finalizing implementation with a school partner now. So
Yeah.
yes, we have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of our own came from the education system and has tons of great insights into that. So we love working with schools. They're great partners. We have another one, Craig. So how do you train managers who might be skeptical about the process?
Yeah, that's good. I think the first piece is that the process is for their benefit. It's to make interviewing easier and less burdensome. Like I mentioned, nobody is a natural at interviewing. It takes at bats, it takes practice. Interviewing is tough. And so I think the key part to deal with skepticism from your interviewers or your managers is that this is done to lessen the burden on them. I also think it's a really valuable practice to the extent that you can to include them in the process that you use to build out the questions and determine the scoring criteria. Like we mentioned, sometimes it can be beneficial to build out a focus group to gather ideas and brainstorm with regards to questions and what we're listening for response options. And so I think their skepticism is kind of naturally addressed by involving them in the process. If they get to see what's going into it, they tend to be more accepting of what comes out of it. So I would highly recommend that, again, as well as just stressing that this whole process is to make interviewing easier and ultimately more effective rather than more difficult. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Absolutely. So that was the last question that we have in the Q&A so far. Any other questions that we can help to answer or talk through? I know you're hanging on with us 5 minutes past time, so we really appreciate it. Give it just a second. All right. Craig, I don't think there are any more questions. I know Craig's been the one to say thank you, so I'll jump in and we're gonna overstate our thank yous. We really appreciate you guys spending some time with us this afternoon and jumping on. A couple friendly reminders. You'll get the the presentation and the recording tomorrow. And that'll include a link to the previous demo that is kind of a twin to this, or demo webinar that is a twin to this one. But I know we've got some additional webinars coming up in this series that should be in the next 3 or 4 weeks that we'd love to have you join as well. So keep an eye out for those. But otherwise, we want to thank you for spending this Wednesday afternoon with us, and hope everyone has a great afternoon. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.